What up, doe? Welcome to the D. From the concrete of Gratiot to the hustle of 7 Mile. From the parties at Hart Plaza to the late nights on Jefferson. This is Detroit Tales and Stories, where the Motor City's realest stories come alive. We're taking you back to when the streets had their own rules, when your whip spoke louder than words, and when survival meant everything. The mid-'80s to the 2000s, when Detroit was raw, uncut, and unforgettable. These are the stories they don't tell you about, straight from the heart of the D. Detroit Tales and Stories. Real stories, real Detroit, real talk. They reached the door just as flashlight beams began sweeping the wine cellar. Mike turned the handle slowly, carefully, and pushed the door open to reveal the garage where Tony's collection of luxury vehicles sat like sleeping beasts. Keys, Mike said, scanning the cars quickly. We need fucking keys. Deshaun was crying now, not sobbing, but tears streaming down his face as the reality of their situation settled in. This wasn't a movie. This wasn't a game. This was real violence with real consequences, and they were trapped in the middle of it. Fall 1991, Palmer Woods. 3 months back on the east side, and Quentin, Quack Williams was already feeling the pull. School at Pershing High was the same bullshit. Teachers who'd given up, textbooks older than his mama, and hallways that smelled like industrial disinfectant mixed with teenage desperation. But the lessons Mike City had taught him that summer on Dexter Avenue kept echoing in his head every time some young cat tried to test him. Respect ain't about the loudest voice, he'd tell himself, walking past the corner boys who used to intimidate him. It's about how you move when shit gets real. October in Detroit meant the leaves were turning colors that reminded you the city still had beauty, buried underneath all the concrete and broken dreams. It also meant homecoming season, which in 1991 meant house parties that could make or break your reputation for the rest of the school year. Yo, Quack! Deshaun jogged up to him after sixth period, that same nervous energy he'd had all summer still radiating off him like heat. You hear about Big Tony's party this weekend? Anthony, Big Tony Richardson, was legend at Pershing, 6'4", built like he was carved from granite, and rumored to be moving serious weight for some westside connects. His parties weren't just parties. They were events that people talked about for months afterward. What about it? Quack asked, adjusting his backpack filled with homework he probably wouldn't do anyway. Nigga? It's at his crib in Palmer Woods. Palmer motherfucking Woods, dog. Deshaun's eyes were wide like he just discovered electricity. You know what kind of money you need to live out there? Quack knew. Palmer Woods, old money neighborhood where Detroit's black elite had been living since the 1960s. Doctors, lawyers, successful business owners, and apparently successful dope boys who'd graduated from corner pharmaceuticals to wholesale distribution. So what you saying? Quack asked, though he already knew where this was heading. I'm saying we need to get invited to this shit. Mark is gonna be there, Larry. Probably your boy Mike City too. All the finest bitches from every high school in the city gonna be up in there. The mention of Mike City made Quack's chest tighten with something between excitement and anxiety. He'd kept in touch with his West Side family through weekend visits to Grandma Pearl's, but this would be different. This would be him showing up to their world as an equal, not just some young eastside kid who needed protection. Saturday night came with that October chill that made you know winter wasn't far behind. Quack stood in front of his bedroom mirror trying to decide between his best pair of Jordans and the black Timberlands Mike had convinced him to buy with his summer job money. The Timbs won. They had that West Side authority that Jordans couldn't match. His outfit was simple but clean. Black jeans that fit right, not too baggy, not too tight. A burgundy sweater that brought out the gold in his chain. And that confidence Mike had taught him came from within, not from what you wore. Where you going looking all grown? His mama asked from the kitchen doorway. arms crossed in that universal black mother pose that meant she could see through any lie you were about to tell. Just a house party, Ma. I'll be back by 2. She studied his face for a long moment. At 34, Dorothy Williams had seen enough young men come and go from these streets to know the difference between a house party and trouble. But she also saw something different in her son since that summer, a steadiness that hadn't been there before. 2 o'clock, Quentin. Not 2:15, not 2:30. 2 o'clock. Yes, ma'am. Deshaun picked him up in his older brother's Monte Carlo SS, midnight blue with chrome wheels that caught every streetlight they passed. The sound system was thumping NWA's Straight Outta Compton, so hard the windows vibrated. And for a moment, riding through the eastside toward Palmer Woods, Quack felt like they were characters in their own movie. Palmer Woods at night was a different world. Tree-lined streets with actual working streetlights, houses that looked like castles, and lawns that somebody actually paid to maintain. Big Tony's house sat at the end of a cul-de-sac, like a brick fortress. 2 stories of old Detroit money architecture with cars parked on both sides of the street that cost more than most people made in a year. The bass line from the party could be felt 2 blocks away, a rhythmic heartbeat that made your chest vibrate. As they walked up the circular driveway, past Benzes, Beamers, and at least 3 Cadillac Eldorados with custom paint jobs, Quack realized this wasn't just a high school party. This was serious. God damn, Deshaun whispered, staring up at the house like he was looking at a spaceship. This nigga Tony really living like this? The front door opened before they could knock. Big Tony himself stood there. All 6'4" of him wearing a cream-colored silk shirt that probably cost more than Quack's entire outfit. Gold chain thick enough to choke a horse, and a smile that was equal parts welcoming and predatory. Y'all must be Quack and Deshaun. Tony's voice was deep enough to feel in your bones. Mike City told me to expect some eastside youngins with sense. Y'all look the part. Come on in. Inside was like stepping into another dimension. The house was enormous. Cathedral ceilings, marble floors, and furniture that looked like it belonged in a magazine. But what really caught Quack's attention was the people. This wasn't just high school kids. These were grown men and women, players and their ladies, all dressed like they were auditioning for music videos. The music was loud enough to make conversation difficult, but not so loud you couldn't think. DJ was mixing everything from hip-hop to R&B to that Detroit techno that was starting to make noise in underground clubs. Groups of people clustered around different rooms, some playing cards, some dancing, some engaged in conversations that looked like business meetings. And the women, Jesus Christ, the women. Quack, what the fuck you doing here, lil nigga? He turned to see Mike City approaching with that same grin that had terrified him in the alley 6 months ago. But now, it felt like coming home. Mike looked older somehow, more expensive clothes, heavier jewelry, and eyes that had seen more since summer ended. Mike! They embraced like brothers, and Quack felt some of that nervous energy leave his chest. Tony invited us. Said you put in a good word. Damn right I did. You my motherfucking family now. Mike's arm around his shoulder felt protective and proud. Come on, let me show you around. This party just getting started. The tour revealed just how serious Big Tony's operation was. The basement had been converted into something between a nightclub and a casino, professional bar, dance floor with actual DJ booth, and card tables where the betting started at amounts that made Quack's head spin. The upstairs had quieter spaces for more intimate conversations, and bedroom doors that were closed for reasons everyone understood, but nobody talked about directly. Check this shit out, Mike said, leading them to a back room where Marcus and Larry were holding court with a group of women who looked like they stepped off magazine covers. My cousin's been waiting to see you. Marcus looked up from a conversation with a light-skinned girl whose dress was so tight it looked painted on. Quack! My motherfucking little brother. He stood up, and Quack was surprised to see he'd grown even more confident since summer. Look at this nigga, all grown up and shit. Larry just nodded with that cool smile, but his eyes said everything. These westside cats had accepted him as family, and that meant something in a world where family was the only thing that mattered. Y'all need to meet some people, Marcus said, gesturing to the women around them. Ladies, this my little brother Quack. He good people, so treat him right. What happened next felt like a blur of introductions, drinks that tasted better than anything Quack had ever had, and conversations with women who were way more sophisticated than any girls at Pershing High. There was Keisha, a college girl from Wayne State who studied business and talked about opening her own salon. Monique, who worked at a law firm downtown and wore her ambition like expensive perfume, and Destiny, who was closer to Quack's age, but carried herself like she'd already figured out secrets most adults never learned. So you Mike's little brother? Destiny asked, sitting close enough that Quack could smell her perfume, something floral and expensive that made his head swim. She was brown-skinned with eyes that seemed to see everything and judge nothing. Something like that, Quack replied, trying to sound more confident than he felt. That's good. Mike's good people. He looks out for his family. She took a sip of her drink, never breaking eye contact. You gonna look out for me tonight? The question hung in the air between them, loaded with possibilities that made Quack's pulse quicken. Before he could answer, the music changed, something slower, more intimate, and Destiny stood up, extending her hand. Dance with me. The dance floor was crowded with couples moving to the rhythm of something that felt more like foreplay than entertainment. Destiny pressed against him in ways that made coherent thought impossible, her body moving like she was teaching him a language he'd never known he wanted to learn. You nervous? She whispered in his ear, her breath warm against his neck. Nah, he lied. She laughed, a sound like honey over broken glass. It's okay. First time at one of Tony's parties can be overwhelming. He likes to entertain. As if on cue, Quack noticed what he missed before. Some of the couples weren't just dancing. They were doing things right there on the dance floor that would have gotten them arrested in public, and nobody seemed to care. If anything, it was adding to the atmosphere, like the whole party was moving towards something inevitable. You want to see the real party? Destiny asked, still moving against him in ways that made his jeans uncomfortably tight. What you mean? Instead of answering, she took his hand and led him toward a staircase he hadn't noticed before. As they climbed, the music got quieter but somehow more intense, like they were ascending into a different kind of energy entirely. The upstairs hallway was dimly lit with red bulbs that made everything look like a movie set. Door after door lined both sides, and from behind several of them came sounds that left no doubt about what was happening inside. Tony likes to provide options, Destiny explained, stopping in front of a door that was slightly ajar. Some people like privacy. Some people like to share. Some people like to watch. She pushed the door open wider, and Quack's world tilted on its axis. The room was larger than his entire bedroom at home, with a king-size bed that currently held more bodies than Quack could immediately count. Men and women in various states of undress were engaged in acts that he'd only seen in magazines his older cousin kept hidden under his mattress. But this wasn't dirty or desperate. It was luxurious, expensive, like everything else in Big Tony's world. You ever been with more than one woman at the same time? Destiny asked, her hand sliding down to rest on his chest. Quack's mouth was too dry to answer. Hell, he'd barely been with one woman at a time, and that was mostly fumbling around in the back seats of cars with girls who were just as inexperienced as he was. It's okay, Destiny continued, reading his silence correctly. We can start slow. There's another room. She led him further down the hall to a small room where the atmosphere was more intimate. Two other couples were there, but they were focused on each other, creating pockets of privacy within the shared space. Destiny closed the door behind them and turned to face him. "You trust me?" she asked. "Yeah," he managed to say, though his voice came out rougher than intended. What happened next was education in its most primal form. Destiny moved with the confidence of someone who knew exactly what she wanted and exactly how to get it. She introduced him to sensations he didn't know existed, to the difference between sex as fumbling teenage experiment and sex as adult art form. When they were joined by Monique, the law firm girl who turned out to be even more adventurous than her professional exterior suggested, Quack felt like he was being initiated into a secret society that most people never even knew existed. Time became elastic. Minutes felt like hours, hours felt like minutes. The boundaries between where he ended and they began blurred until there was only sensation, only the education of pleasure given and received by people who understood that physical intimacy was just another form of communication between sophisticated adults. When it was over, and Quack wasn't even sure when that transition happened, he lay between them feeling like a different person entirely. Not just because of what had happened physically, but because of what it represented. He'd crossed another threshold, moved from boy to man in ways that had nothing to do with age and everything to do with experience. "You okay?" Destiny asked, running her fingers across his chest. "Yeah," he said, and meant it. "More than okay." "Good," Monique added with a satisfied smile. "Tony likes his parties to be memorable." They dressed slowly, casually, like what had happened was as normal as conversation over dinner. And in this world, Quack was beginning to understand, maybe it was. Downstairs, the party had evolved. The music was harder, the dancing more intense, and the energy had that electric feeling that comes right before something significant happens. Mike said he found him as soon as he reached the main floor. "There he is," Mike's grin was knowing and approving. "Looked like you had some educational experiences tonight." "Something like that," Quack replied, trying to play it cool but knowing his face probably gave everything away. "Good. That's what family does. We look out for each other, make sure everybody gets what they need." Mike's expression became more serious. "But check it, young dog." Party's about to get more intense. Some business cats showed up, and when business mixes with pleasure, sometimes shit gets complicated. As if summoned by his words, the front door opened and 3 men walked in, who made the entire room's energy shift. They weren't dressed for a party. Dark suits, serious expressions, and the kind of presence that made even Big Tony look smaller. "Who the fuck is that?" Deshaun asked, appearing at Quack's side with wide eyes and breath that smelled like expensive liquor. "Trouble," Mike answered simply. "Eastside cats who don't like westside niggas getting too successful in their neighborhood." The lead man was tall and slim with a mustache that looked like it belonged on a 1970s pimp. His suit was perfectly tailored, his shoes were Italian leather, and his eyes swept the room like he was conducting an inventory. When his gaze landed on Big Tony, the temperature in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees. "Anthony," the man said, his voice carrying despite the music, "we need to talk." Tony's response was to turn the music down until conversation became possible. "Marcus," he replied, acknowledging the man with a nod that was polite but not deferential. "You know you're always welcome in my house." "But this is a party, not a board meeting." "Sometimes business don't wait for convenient timing," Marcus replied. His 2 companions flanked him like bookends, their hands resting casually near their waistbands in ways that made everyone pay attention. "We got some concerns about your expansion into territory that's been spoken for." The room was listening now, even pretending not to. Conversations became whispers, dancing slowed to a crawl, and everyone became hyper-aware of where the exits were located. "My expansion?" Tony's voice remained level, but Quack could see tension in his shoulders. "Last I checked, money was green everywhere in Detroit. Customers buy from whoever provides the best product at the best price." "See, that's where you're wrong," Marcus said, taking a step closer. Customers buy from whoever we say they buy from. And lately, they've been buying from you when they should be buying from us. Mike City's hand touched Quack's arm. We need to bounce, he whispered. Right fucking now. But before they could move toward the door, Marcus's voice rose above the tension. See, Anthony, respect is something that has to be maintained. And when young cats forget who was here first, sometimes they need to be reminded. What happened next occurred in the kind of slow motion that only happens when violence becomes inevitable. Marcus reached inside his suit jacket, and Tony's response was immediate. But Tony wasn't reaching for a weapon. He was reaching for a phone. Y'all motherfuckers want to disrespect my house in front of my guests? Tony's voice boomed across the marble floors. Security! The doors that had been hidden in plain sight throughout the house suddenly opened, and men with the build of professional athletes emerged carrying guns that looked like they belonged in war zones rather than house parties. The message was clear. Big Tony hadn't just been successful in the drug game. He'd been smart about protection. Marcus and his men found themselves outgunned and surrounded in less than 10 seconds. But instead of backing down, Marcus smiled like he'd been expecting this exact scenario. You think having more guns makes you smarter? He asked Tony, whose confidence was beginning to look less certain. You think protection matters when the people protecting you got families too? The implied threat hung in the air like smoke from a gun that hadn't been fired yet. Last chance, Anthony, Marcus continued. We can settle this like businessmen, or we can settle it like the streets. But it's gonna get settled tonight. Tony looked around his house, at his guests, his security, his expensive furniture, and the life he'd built from nothing. Then he looked back at Marcus and made a choice that would echo through Detroit streets for years to come. Fuck you and everything you represent, Tony said, his voice carrying across the silent room. This is my house, my territory, and my city. Y'all can get the fuck out or get carried out. Marcus nodded like Tony had just confirmed something he'd already known. I was hoping you'd say that. The sound of breaking glass came from somewhere upstairs, followed immediately by shouting and the kind of chaos that can only mean one thing. The house was being invaded from multiple directions simultaneously. It's a setup, someone screamed, and suddenly the party became a battlefield. Gunfire erupted from at least 3 directions at once. Tony's security was good, but Marcus had brought more than just the 2 men everyone could see. Windows exploded inward as men in dark clothing poured through them like deadly water. The marble floors that had looked so elegant 10 minutes ago became treacherous with broken glass and spilled blood. Quack hit the ground as bullets whined overhead, his mind immediately returning to every lesson Mike City had taught him about surviving street situations. Don't freeze, don't panic, find cover, find an exit, move with purpose. This way, Mike was yelling, grabbing both Quack and Deshaun and pulling them toward what looked like a service entrance near the kitchen. All around them, party guests were screaming, running, and trying to escape a situation that had turned from celebration to slaughter in less than 60 seconds. Behind them, Big Tony was screaming orders at his security team while simultaneously returning fire with a chrome-plated .45 that looked like it had been custom-made. Protect the house! Don't let them get to the upstairs. But it was already too late. The sound of gunfire was coming from the second floor now, too, which meant Marcus and his crew had successfully infiltrated the entire building. This wasn't just a territorial dispute. This was a planned military operation designed to eliminate Big Tony and everyone associated with him. They made it to the kitchen before the lights went out. Emergency lighting kicked in immediately, bathing everything in red that made the chaos look even more hellish. Mike City was moving like someone who'd been in similar situations before, leading them through the darkness with confidence that came from experience Quack hoped he'd never need. Through here, Mike whispered, pushing open a door that led to what looked like a wine cellar. Tony showed me this shit earlier, connects to the garage. Behind them, the gunfire was getting closer and more intense. Someone was screaming, high-pitched, agonized screaming that meant people were getting hurt badly. Glass continued to break, furniture was being overturned, and the sound of running feet suggested the battle was moving throughout the entire house. The wine cellar was dark and cool, lined with bottles that probably cost more than most people's cars, but right now it represented safety, a tunnel through the chaos that might lead to survival. "Move, move, move," Mike whispered urgently, pushing them toward a door on the far side of the cellar. Behind them, they could hear voices. Men coordinating their search, getting closer. They reached the door just as flashlight beams began sweeping the wine cellar. Mike turned the handle slowly, carefully, and pushed the door open to reveal the garage where Tony's collection of luxury vehicles sat like sleeping beasts. "Keys," Mike said, scanning the cars quickly. "We need fucking keys." Deshaun was crying now, not sobbing, but tears streaming down his face as the reality of their situation settled in. This wasn't a movie. This wasn't a game. This was real violence with real consequences, and they were trapped in the middle of it. A Cadillac Eldorado sat closest to them, and Mike tried the door, unlocked. He slid inside and began searching frantically. Glove compartment, sun visor under the seat, nothing. "Check the others," he whispered to Quack, who began trying door handles while his heart hammered against his ribs like it was trying to escape his chest. The sound of the cellar door exploding open made them all freeze. Voices getting louder, moving in their direction. "Find them," someone was saying. "Tony's dead, but there might be witnesses." Tony was dead. Big Tony, who'd welcomed them into his house, who created this incredible world of luxury and possibility, was dead. Shot to death in his own marble foyer while protecting guests who'd come to celebrate with him. Mike found keys in the third car, a black Mercedes S-Class that looked like it belonged to a diplomat. The engine turned over immediately, purring like a contented cat. "Get in," he whispered urgently. "Now!" They piled into the Mercedes just as armed men emerged from the cellar door, their flashlights sweeping the garage like searchlights. Mike put the car in reverse and hit the gas, not caring about the noise anymore, only caring about distance between them and the bullets that were about to fly. The garage door was closed. "Hold on," Mike said, and floored the accelerator. The Mercedes hit the garage door at 30 miles per hour, exploding through it in a shower of wood and metal that sounded like the world ending. Behind them, muzzle flashes lit up the garage as Marcus's men opened fire, bullets spiderwebbing the rear window, but not penetrating the luxury sedan's reinforced glass. They were flying down Palmer Woods' tree-lined streets at speeds that would have been suicidal under normal circumstances, but normal had ended the moment Marcus walked through Tony's front door. Behind them, the house that had represented everything possible about success in 1991 Detroit was burning. Orange flames licking at the night sky like the city's dreams were being cremated. Mike didn't slow down until they reached the Lodge Freeway, merging into late-night traffic that suddenly felt safer than the most affluent neighborhood in Detroit. Only then did he allow himself to breathe, his hands shaking slightly on the steering wheel. "Is everybody okay?" he asked, checking the rearview mirror to make sure they weren't being followed. "Yeah," Quack managed to say, though he wasn't sure it was true. Physically, he was unharmed, but something inside him had been fundamentally changed by witnessing violence on that scale, by seeing how quickly celebration could turn to massacre. Deshaun was still crying, staring out the window at the city lights streaming past. "Tony's really dead?" "Yeah, little nigga," Mike replied softly. "Tony's dead. His crew's dead, and anybody who stayed at that party too long is probably dead too." The weight of that reality settled over them like a heavy blanket. If they'd been slower, if Mike hadn't recognized the danger, if they'd been in the wrong room at the wrong moment, they would have been casualties in a war they didn't even understand. "What happens now?" Quack asked. Mike was quiet for a long moment. navigating through traffic while considering the question. When he finally spoke, his voice carried the wisdom of someone who'd seen this cycle repeat itself too many times. "Now you understand why everything I taught you this summer matters," he said. "Respect, loyalty, knowing when to fight and when to walk away. Tonight, you learned the difference between real power and fake power." Tony had money, he had guns, he had security, but Marcus had something more important. What? Marcus had patience and he had a plan. Tony got emotional, got disrespectful, and it cost him everything. Mike glanced at Quack in the rearview mirror. "Don't ever forget that lesson, young dog. In these streets, the smartest motherfucker wins, not the richest one." They drove in silence through the empty Detroit streets, past liquor stores and corner boys and all the familiar landmarks of their world. But everything looked different now, filtered through the knowledge of how quickly it could all disappear. When Mike finally dropped them off at Quack's house third, the porch light was still on and his mama's silhouette was visible in the front window. She'd been waiting, probably worrying, definitely praying that her son would come home safe from whatever adventure he'd gone seeking. "Quack," Mike said before they got out of the car. "What happened tonight? What you saw? What you experienced? That stays between us. Don't tell nobody about the party, about the women, about Tony, about none of it. You understand?" "Yeah, I understand." "Good. And one more thing. This is why family matters. Tonight, we looked out for each other. We survived because we moved as one. Don't ever forget that." As Quack walked up the steps to his front door, his legs still shaky from adrenaline and fear, he realized that Mike City had given him another education. Not just about sex or violence or the economics of the street pharmaceutical business, but about the price of every choice, about the weight of consequences, about the difference between boys playing dress up and men accepting responsibility for their decisions. His mama opened the door before he could knock. "You okay, baby?" she asked, studying his face with eyes that had seen too much worry over too many years. "Yeah, Ma, I'm okay." She hugged him then, and for a moment he was just her little boy again, safe in her arms, protected from a world that could turn deadly without warning. But even as he held her, he knew something had changed forever. The boy who left for Tony's party was gone, replaced by someone who understood that every paradise had serpents, every celebration had consequences, and every choice you made in the streets echoed through eternity. That night, as he lay in bed listening to sirens wail somewhere in the distance, Quentin Williams understood that his real education was just beginning. The summer on Dexter Avenue had taught him about respect. Tonight in Palmer Woods had taught him about survival. Tomorrow he would start learning about the price of both. That's another chapter from the Tales and Stories, fam. If these stories take you back to the D you remember or help you understand the D you never knew, make sure you hit that subscribe button and ring the bell. Drop a comment and tell us your Detroit story. What block you claimed, what party store you remember, what ride you were pushing. Follow us on the gram at Detroit Tales and Stories for behind the scenes content and rare photos from the era. Until next time, keep the D alive in your heart. Peace.